Entrepreneurs are most inspired when they have constraints and they think about how to break out of those constraints. I think we're in the middle of a decade-long golden age. So this is an inflection point with artificial intelligence and what those tools are looking like right now and how people are thinking differently about innovating. Definitely this is a very opportune time.
We like to say that Taiwan is a quote-unquote Wakanda of Asia. Taiwan has a sizable commercial opportunity on the table. Taiwan is a small, hidden type of country with an incredibly valuable resource, that being our talent pool.
Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Divi Gopalan. They are the supercharged businesses that are changing how we live and spend and the way our economies grow. They are today's startups. Some will struggle, some will thrive, and a few of them may achieve the dream of becoming a unicorn. That is a company whose valuation reaches $1 billion without being listed on the stock market. Well, to help us better understand Taiwan's position in the startup world and which of today's startups may become tomorrow's unicorns, we welcome Jun Wakabayashi in Taipei. He is a principal at AppWorks, one of Taiwan's leading accelerators and venture capital funds, managing $350 million in assets with over 1,500 active founders. And from Ho Chi Minh City, we have Vinny Loria. He's the founder of Singapore-based Golden Gate Ventures with $250 million in assets and 9 unicorns to date. Thank you both for joining us. Now, added up, both your firms have invested in about 14 unicorns, and that is quite a feat considering how rare these billion-dollar startups are. So I'm going to start with you, Vinny. Is there a magic formula or is there a certain kind of magic ingredient that you see that you immediately know that that can be a unicorn?
Thank you for that introduction. In terms of trying to identify, while there might not be this magic way of identifying, the reality is we're looking for certain behavior, certain traits of founders that say, can I see this founder being a CEO of a billion-dollar company? And generally that's looking for a few things. Number one is, do they have that leadership capability? Number two, do they inspire people behind them, a team to go blindly into something that has a lot of high risk? And thirdly, what drives them? Where does the motivation comes from? And we'll spend a lot of time really assessing those three qualities in order to find, founders that show that potential.
Right. Okay. Let's bring that over here to Taiwan. And Jun, as you probably very well know, Taiwan has produced 3 unicorns: Appier, Gogoro, and 91 App. What trends are you seeing? Where do you think the next unicorn can come from, industry-wise, trend-wise, production-wise?
Yeah, well, I think what is evidently clear in Taiwan is that there's a sizable market, but not too big. There's a sizable population, but not necessarily the largest in the region. So to really achieve that quote-unquote billion-dollar valuation, what we have found is generally there probably needs to be some sort of international expansion at some point or another. So where might that come from? I mean, there's a few companies in our portfolio that are well on track. For example, KKday, they're actually regional from day one. They're one of the largest travel experiences providers based out of Taiwan, but targeting all over Asia, especially active in markets like Korea and Japan. And so because they're regional by day one, they inherently have access to a much, much larger market size and total addressable market, giving an ability to drive much more value and in turn a reflection on their price. So if there was one company that would probably be where I would place my bets in the long-term future. I mean, I think Taiwan has always been super strong in the hardware realm. That's where it's built up its capabilities and prowess over the years. So I'm sure there would be something in that space as well, especially with the rise of AI and the reliance on hardware and semiconductor companies.
Right. And a key component for many startups is funding. Global venture capital, or VC funding, may have peaked in 2021, but last year still saw the second highest level of VC investments in startups, hitting $445 billion globally. Some say this is the true golden age of startups, a digital era that makes it easier to connect with customers, gain market access, and grow. What do you think of that, Vinny? Is this the golden age?
100% golden age. I would give you 2 reasons for that. Number one, if you look at Silicon Valley's history over the past few decades, the types of startups that have really thrived in a time of market and global uncertainty, let's even say a Facebook, these are when these companies are being born. So entrepreneurs, I think, are most inspired when they have constraints and they think about how to break out of those constraints. That would be reason number one, just in terms of a market cycle. Number two, I think we're in the middle of a decade-long sort of golden age. So this is an inflection point. And with tools like, or with artificial intelligence and what those tools are looking like right now and how people are thinking differently about innovating, this is an opportune time. And definitely here in Asia, this is a very opportune time.
Right, Jun. So, Taiwan already has the advantage when it comes to it's already immediately identified as a country that is tech advanced. It's got the semiconductor industry. But in reality, is Taiwan really experiencing a golden age for startups?
Taiwan is, our situation is both a blessing and a curse. It's large enough to the point where entrepreneurs can actually create a pretty sizable business, but to the point where it might get global recognition, not so much. But that's actually why it's super important right now. For us at AppWorks and as a VC firm, we tend to focus on what we call paradigm shifts. There's a terminology that we coined called ABS, AI, blockchain, and Southeast Asia, 2 technology focus, 1 geographic focus. But these are all rising tides that will materially impact the way we go about living our daily lives. These type of technologies such as AI and blockchain, for example, will have a monumental impact on the way things are done, the way business is done. And here in Taiwan, that is no different. Now we're also starting to see the same with AI as well. Given that it's a paradigm shift, people are willing to revise their thesis on Taiwan and take a second look.
Right. You mentioned playing fields there, Jun, and I want to put some figures to it. Now, Taiwan is home to nearly 1,000 known startups. As we can see here in this graphic, more than 4 out of 5 are based in the northern cities of Taipei, Taoyuan, and Hsinchu. That's the home base of Taiwan's semiconductor industry, of course. So how does Taiwan measure up in the startup world? Well, let's take a look at the global rankings of startup ecosystems. Research is compiled by the Center Startup Blink. And what you can see here is that none of the top 5 countries are actually from Asia. But coming in at 6th to top the list of Asian countries, there's Singapore, while Taiwan is ranked 24th, although it has climbed up a spot from last year. Now, I want to, maybe I'll start with you, Jun. Is 24th a fair place for Taiwan to be? What do you make of that?
I think there are definitely pros and cons for doing startups in Taiwan, and there's certainly always room for improvement. On the positive note, we think one of Taiwan's strongest competitive advantages is its talent pool. The country graduates maybe upwards of around 40,000 engineers per year, a mix of both hardware and software. And the great things about these type of talents is that their efficacy and their output is probably several folds higher than what you might find in a country like Indonesia or Vietnam, but certainly at a more competitive price point compared to, say, Singapore or increasingly maybe even China and India. Furthermore, these type of talents are incredibly loyal. They're very disciplined, as is the ethos of Taiwanese education. So that can be seen in the fact that so many blue chip tech companies from the West have set up R&D shops in Taiwan over the last few years, including the likes of Google, AWS, and even some unicorns in this part of the world. For example, Lalamove, Zendit, and I think also Caro is scoping around Taiwan market as well. So I think that is a testament to the talent pool in Taiwan. We like to say and joke around that Taiwan is a quote-unquote Wakanda of Asia. If you guys have seen Avengers before, Taiwan is a small, hidden type of country with an incredibly valuable resource, that being our talent pool. But beyond the talent pool, Taiwan has a sizable commercial opportunity on the table. Granted, not super big, but enough to make a dent. There's a sound rule of law. People are very nice here. So it's very suitable for entrepreneurs who are looking to hire talent, tap into a sizable market, operate at very low cost.
Vinny, we also heard Jun talk about perhaps some of the qualities of Taiwan, the work ethic, it's got a good structure, it's got the technology, but at the same time, how much is it necessary to have that kind of creativity, that freedom of thinking, that whole idea of being able to think out of the box and do something that is very different? And the reason I ask this is because I find it also curious that you've ended up in Vietnam in your journey with startups and VC.
I think that is a sophisticated question in that 100%. To be an entrepreneur, to see an opportunity that the rest of the world doesn't see, you need to have that creative mind. And in venture capital, I don't have a finance background. I have a computer programming background. There's an art to it here that's not purely financial. What I will say is I think it's really important to break out of this idea of like Taiwanese startups for Taiwan. 25, 30 million people, that's just not a big enough market. When you mention the semiconductors, that's a global sort of industry. If I think of our startups that have either started in Taiwan or gone into Taiwan, and these are Singapore incorporated companies, but they're not Singaporean founders. They're founders from across Asia, which include Carousel, MoneySmart, Caro. Each of these companies are in like 5 or 6 countries. And I think the idea that it's not just that creativity, but you need to think about it more than a single domestic market, and what market do you want to go after is really important. And to Jun's point of, yes, greater Southeast Asia, which we've also piggybacked on, and we do look at that corridor between Taiwan and Southeast Asia as really valuable. We're talking about 750 million people. That's a huge, huge sort of market.
And speaking of Taiwanese startups, we do have an example here. I want to take you behind the scenes to visit a startup that wants to tackle one of Taiwan's biggest issues, and that's fraud. Cases have skyrocketed over the past year. So our Taiwan Plus reporter Joyce Cheng looks at this startup that's aiming to better protect consumers and businesses and institutions in the region.
A Taiwanese startup demonstrating its contribution to fighting rampant telefraud in the country. Though the idea behind Caller ID is not new, anti-fraud technology like GoGoLooks needs to keep up with a rapidly advancing digital world. With the rise of generative AI and deep fakes, scammers are constantly getting new tools to commit even more sophisticated frauds.
When faking stuff becomes so easy, right? Trust is even more valuable. Our vision is to empower people on the internet to trust with each other, even at a first glance.
Telefraud is common in Taiwan, and not just through phone calls, but also via messaging apps. Between 2019 and 2021, the number of mobile fraud cases exceeded 71,000, with victims losing almost $45 million.
Taiwan is a high-tech island, so that also provides a very good soil for these criminals.
People have even been trafficked to other countries through phone and messaging scams on promises of lucrative jobs. It's gotten to a point where the government has added audio warnings to incoming international calls. Equipping users with the right information to confidently and safely interact in a digital world is this startup's goal. So they've also shared their technology with Taiwan's police, and their software has been commended by President Tsai Ing-wen.
Technology itself probably is neutral, right? So the problem is like who uses it, is a good guy or a bad guy.
Ensuring public safety is no easy feat in a rapidly evolving digital world. Though they won't be seen patrolling the streets, software engineers like the ones at this startup are keeping a watchful eye and doing what they can to equip everyday users with the latest necessary defenses. Andy Xue and Joyce Sen for Taiwan Plus.
Well, it seems that using GoGo seems to be a popular way to launch a startup here. Can you tell us what Taiwan's edge is when it comes to launching a new enterprise or a new startup that helps the entrepreneurial community?
Yeah, so when it comes to Taiwan, the great thing about the Taiwanese market is that consumers are actually quite savvy. So if you look at the very first e-commerce website, it was PC Home, launched in the late 1990s. So Taiwanese consumers have been shopping online for the better half of over 2 decades now. So when it comes to embracing new technologies, and when it comes to trying something new, when it comes to embracing innovation, that has always come quite naturally to a lot of Taiwanese consumers. And as such, Taiwan lends itself as a pretty good testing ground when it comes to launching new innovations. They came to Taiwan because they realized that there's a massive opportunity on the table. Taiwanese consumers are very forthcoming to innovation, trying new things, and they eventually expanded here, even at a later stage, and found out it was a very, very lucrative market. So I think the willingness to adopt new technology lends a significant edge to a lot of these entrepreneurs looking to start up new ventures. Because at the end of the day, when you're starting up new ventures, you want to be iterating consistently, tightening the feedback loop. And I don't think there's any better consumer base other than Taiwanese consumers. That aside, as mentioned before, our talent pool is very effective, very cheap. In the early days, you want to keep burn at a minimum. So if you're looking to equip a strong group of early engineers that are looking to go along with you for the ride, Taiwan is a fantastic place. And that's certainly what we've done with our AppWorks school. It's a free coding bootcamp, runs programs every 4 months, and it teaches students for free.
I want to pick up on a point that you made and put it to you, Vinny. June talks about the idea of the consumer base being really open to trying things and kind of being a good test market. Firstly, in your point of view, to your point of view, how important is that in the success of a startup? And are you seeing other parts of Asia that have that kind of same consumer appetite?
To June's point, I think Taiwan is uniquely valuable in terms of not only adopting that technology, but sitting between the East and West culturally, and so that a lot of this technology can go global from Taiwan. And again, even PC Home, I bought one of those computers probably 20 plus years ago. And so I think that is the most important thing, that if a Taiwanese founder is looking to build a company, it is critical to be thinking outside of Taiwan from day one. And whether that is a Southeast Asia corridor and opportunity there, or for a Western market, such as the issues that were just highlighted with the startup, those are universal, those are global.
You both bring up some great points about Taiwan, the amount of skilled labor there is, the tech advances, the consumer base now, and then the cost of operation. But at the same time, there is a sense that maybe Taiwan could still be doing better. There should be more coming out of it. If I kind of listen to go through the checklist that you guys have gone through and what makes a successful place to have a successful startup. Investors looking at startups often say that there's a missing wow factor. And what do you think that would be, June, if you could put your finger on it?
So if you compare Taiwan to other markets in Southeast Asia that have generated a lot of hype, for example, say in Indonesia, Taiwan comparatively lacks both the scale and the growth story. So Indonesia, by comparison, at its peak growing 7% year over year in terms of GDP growth, and also one of the fourth largest population in the world. That's very, very attractive to investors, especially those betting on the long term, right? Because suddenly when you have 270 million people coming to terms with technology, there's a lot of opportunities on the table. Taiwan, by comparison, is already a very, very developed market. GDP is maybe 2 to 3% a year. So when it comes to that standpoint, there's not an obvious wow factor there. It's not a very shiny thing in the room. But where I think Taiwan can stand out is within its deep tech prowess. As mentioned before, AI is an incredibly large rising tide right now. And you stack on top of that things like IoT, so interconnected hardware. I think that's where Taiwan can really shine. So it just really needs to improve upon its messaging and its marketing and emphasizing on some of its strengths rather than mitigating some of its weaknesses.
We spoke to James Tan. He's the chairman of ACE Singapore, our Action Community for Entrepreneurship, which is Singapore's national advocate for the startup ecosystem. He's also the managing partner at Singapore-based Quest Ventures, and he told us how Singapore has successfully fostered its thriving startup ecosystem.
So at the heart of our mission is for ACE Singapore to be an effective conduit, creating greater avenues and channels for our local entrepreneurs and founders to thrive and to grow Singapore's innovation ecosystem. So in line with this mandate, we work around the 5 key pillars, which are startups, corporations, risk capital, the public sector, and institutes of higher learning. And our overarching goal is to create a fertile culture and environment for entrepreneurs to succeed.
Right. So I'm going to bring this to you, Vinny. There is a train of thought that, okay, let me take it back a step here. The question is, how involved should governments be in creating that startup ecosystem or environment or kind of the space for startups to be in?
So as somebody from Silicon Valley who made the move to Singapore to set up a venture capital fund in Singapore and partnered with the government from day one, Singapore is the gold standard of how governments should work with an entrepreneurial community, where they should foster innovation, where they should pull back and let the private market step in.
And Jun, as someone here who is trying to foster this startup environment, what would you say to Taiwan's government of what more they should be doing, perhaps, or what less they should be doing to help the startup community?
Yeah, on that spectrum, I would say it'd be more of let's do a little bit less in that sense. But let's actively try to do less. Basically, I think the government's role here should be to kind of foster information by, in a nicer way, just getting out of the way to some certain degree. Because when you start trying to control, when you start trying to restrict, even though it's for the greater good, you might end up throttling innovation to a certain degree. And, I think a great example is that right now is in the fintech space. So Taiwan's fintech industry is, for all intents and purposes, quite small compared to some of our regional peers. And that's for a whole host of reasons. But one of them is just generally a much more conservative mindset in terms of protecting consumers and also protecting the capital markets. When it comes to embracing innovation in this specific domain, regulators have been much less forthcoming to enacting favorable regulations or lack thereof to embrace new technologies. Banks themselves have to go through rings of hoops to really work with startups. So in that sense, they really just need to figure out ways just to kind of open the door a little bit.
I want to talk about this idea of institutions and the whole kind of, we talked about the government's role here or how the government can help. What about all the other institutions that support perhaps the human resource or perhaps the creativity and development, like universities, education, other financial institutions that would help a startup, Vinny? How important are those? And what do you think can create that successful environment or network for a startup to be able to grow?
Sure. And what I want to highlight, you just mentioned both Singapore, Taiwan, island nations, but I'm this really big believer of constraint makes magic happen. And Singapore just being less than 6 million people, for a lot of these government programs, they're always thinking cross-border, where most other government programs think about how do I foster, that domestic innovation to domestic founders to domestic companies. Singapore, with all of these programs, is because of the size population constraint, thinks about how to do that with neighbors. And so some of these nurturing programs are not just to nurture Singaporeans starting at high school and university, but also attract foreign talent to come and partner up because there's experiences that they would have from other parts of the world. So I've seen firsthand Singapore, again, start at the university level, start with grants, start with investments, start with then backing foreign investors, investing into local companies, and then even supporting companies that are focused on neighboring markets, not even Singapore, all being funded by budgets out of the government. And that's worked really, really well. And the other way to look at it is there's this kind of step function and an ecosystem needs to grow to get from a zero to the first generation to the second generation. Singapore is just entering its second generation. We now have founders that have exited that are starting their second company. Silicon Valley has 7, if not 8 generations behind it, going back to Hewlett and Packard. So for a government to really understand the step function, where to put money, resources, time, effort in the beginning, and then be able to measure that has stepped up and it matured slightly, just like a toddler, and then pulling back from that program and then focusing on a more mature program and later stage startups that need more capital and different sets of resources and different types of talent, and then putting resources there.
Right, and we're just about running out of time, but Jun, just to jump on what Vinny says, which generation is Taiwan in its startup journey, would you say, and where should it be?
We talked about why Taiwan is so conducive to new startups. Part of that is because there is already several generations of successful entrepreneurs out there. A few of the names that I mentioned before, and even you mentioned 91App at the beginning. So Stephen Ho is a serial entrepreneur. I believe this is his third time doing a startup. CEO of KKday. This is also his third time doing startup, having IPO 2 different companies before. So it's almost like an exponential curve here. The more successes we have, the more new talents get bred, and the more new talents that get bred, they go off to start their own businesses, and it's a reinforcing system here. So Taiwan is already, several chapters ahead of an emerging market like Southeast Asia. So that's what makes it quite mutually beneficial for Taiwan to align itself with a region like Southeast Asia. We think there are a lot of mutual synergies, a lot of things that Southeast Asia can learn from Taiwan and vice versa. But I think one of the biggest assets is our incredibly strong pool of experienced mentors who are now willing to give back to the community. In Southeast Asia and Singapore especially, you have many angels now actively seeding the next generation of entrepreneurs. I believe you had in Taiwan here, you had Kevin Lin on here before. It's been fantastic that he's come back to the Taiwan ecosystem to really give back to community. He's been also a very, very active angel. And these are very, very important. Even though these startups may not end up working out, at the very least their tuition, or quote unquote, has been paid for. And when the tuition has been paid for, these entrepreneurs are able to accumulate experiences and wisdom and eventually diffuse them into other people.
Okay, and with that, we say goodbye to our guest, Jun Wakabayashi from AppWorks, speaking to us from Taipei, and Vinny Loria, founding partner of Golden Gate Ventures, speaking to us from Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. Thank you so much, both of you. Now, as we discussed there, startups not only disrupt the status quo through innovation, but also offer a glimpse of the future. And that is why in future episodes, we hope to bring you more insights into the world of startups and the ideas that have the potential to drive growth and transform lives. For our viewers everywhere, thank you so much for joining us. It's been good to have your company. Goodbye and stay connected.